And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have our guest this evening is Derrel Sims. He calls himself the Alien Hunter, and we'll see why later on. But before that, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the latest UFO news. And our shows are always live here Wednesday, and that's at 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. And you know what? I'm going to keep this short this week, and we're going to move ahead and bring in Alejandro. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Doing
Better?
Great. Doing great. And I know we talked about the UFO Congress last week. I'm still reeling. It was such a great experience.
I'm still reeling.
I bet you are. And you get, next week, you're going off on vacation, and a well-deserved vacation. And
yes.
We'll be missing you here, but...
Oh, my gosh. I'm so excited to be on the open ocean. I'll be far, far away, and I am ready for this break.
I'm sure you are. And I'm going to have a surprise guest come in and take your place. Not really take your place. No one can take your place.
Oh.
But, please don't be hurt. I can't take that.
So you're not going to let anybody know?
I'm not going to let anyone know who it is.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll have to pay attention next week.
Maybe
I don't know who it
is. Stephen Greer?
No comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So what's going on?
Could be.
What's going on with the news this week?
Well, I think the first thing I want to talk about is the CubeSat thing, and you've had David Schock on, I believe.
No, I had a gentleman that I can't even recall his name, but even Dave Schock didn't even know who he was. And
I had David Cote on.
Right. Yeah.
And you had a different guy who I thought, but it wasn't Dave Schock.
Nope, it was someone else. And, I really, the poor guy, I drilled him and I said, live on the show, I said, I don't understand why you don't know more about this. And he was just someone who met Dave Cote in a coffee shop and was trying to do a little bit of PR for him. That's how that whole thing. But anyway.
Yeah, I guess I assumed it was Dave Schock because I've been in contact with him quite a bit, and I know you probably got to meet him at the Congress because he was there at the UFO Congress. He's a guy that's working on all of this. Dave Cote I had on my show to talk about the CubeSat. But what's exciting is that they've gotten their funding.
That is amazing. Really?
Yeah, really cool. When I had David Cote on, they were doing an Indiegogo, and they had made some connections and were able to get some funding. They started up a Kickstarter get what they needed. They didn't meet their goal with that Indiegogo. However, with his Kickstarter campaign, they just recently met their goal. They said they brought to the table $16,000 from other funders that they got through the Indiegogo, I believe, and then and the promotion that they did with that. And then with this Kickstarter, Lee Spiegel wrote an article in the Huffington Post, and that was able to give them a kickstart, and they were going for $10,000, which they got. So now they have a total of $26,000, which is enough for them to build and launch a cube satellite to hunt for UFOs.
That's right. The only thing I mentioned, and I think Dave Schock corrected me because I think they had to change something, is that baby was only going to be up there like less than a month. But there's something else. They're going to put it a little bit into a little bit of a higher orbit now, so it's going to be able to stay up longer.
Yeah, so it's not going to be up that long. I know it's only fixed amount of time. I thought it was longer than a month. I thought maybe around 3 or something like that.
Yeah, I believe that's what it's now. It's going to be up there about that long. Right.
Which I was surprised because I didn't realize that. It makes perfect sense. I mean, it's fun to talk about a UFO hunting satellite, and you think of like this little spaceship flying around looking for UFOs or something, but actually it's just a little metal box floating in space that unfortunately is still being pulled by Earth's gravity and will be pulled into orbit, and it will, or into the atmosphere, and it will disintegrate all of this money that people are giving in the Kickstarter. But in the meantime, you'll have a camera. I mean, really, it's a little metal cube up there with cameras looking around, and possibly a radiation monitor, and they're trying to get other devices like maybe a radar or something like that. So it's a really fun project, and I'm really excited that they got their funding and that it's actually going to happen. Some people question, well, you know, is it really worth it? We've got cameras here on the ground. What do we need them up there for? But, you know, I think it's worth it. One, it brings attention to the topic because they've gotten a lot of press for it. And two, you know, it's kind of, there's always got to be the pioneer. There's got to be the people to get out there and do it first. And you learn from what they do to make the project more effective. And I think it's going to be fun.
You know, I was just thinking about this while you were talking about it, and I'm sure the government has something like that up there, don't you think? There's got to be a satellite that has some type of detection.
I think we know they've got something called the space fence. They've got a lot of stuff. You know, NORAD has typically been where they monitor this stuff, which is in Colorado Springs, actually, in Colorado. It used to be in a base over by where I lived in Aurora, Colorado, but now it's the bases. Well, it's in Cheyenne Mountain underground, Peterson Air Force Base in that area. But yeah, they monitor everything, all the space junk and everything that's up there. Of course, they're not technically, or at least we don't know for sure, that they're looking for potential extraterrestrial aircraft, but I think they're looking for anything that could pose a threat, whatever that be, whether it come from here or there. So they definitely keep a close eye on everything in orbit.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, I just don't know what type of detection they have, but you're right. They know where the space junk is, so if they know where that is, they must.
Yeah. They have a whole combination. They use satellites, and they also use, but they've got a whole fleet. I mean, they've got a bunch of stuff. Space Command actually is people who, funny enough, I don't know if everybody knows this, Air Force does really have a group called Space Command that works with NORAD and everything that mostly is in charge of their fleet of satellites to do this sort of thing. But they also have large antenna arrays on the ground. And in fact, we had one out here, and I drove past it, funny enough, every day out just south of Phoenix here. But that one did close down because they upgraded the technology, essentially, and they didn't need these large antenna arrays on the ground anymore. And they were really weird. They're just random, you know, this weird kind of metal fence it looked like. That was maybe that's why they called it a space fence. So it didn't look like anything too high tech, but that's what it did, monitor space. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, this will be good because it's, you know, civilian owned and monitored.
Well, and and I'm not trying to make fun of people who believe in this sort of thing. We talked about Stephen Greer. If some of you people who may feel that you can meditate and connect with them, tell them to come and say hi to the CubeSat, you know. A perfect chance for a photo opportunity. It's going to be in space, so hopefully it'll be a little safer for them to zoom by and say hi.
Yeah, maybe they can do like some type of remote viewing thing or something. Who knows? But,
yeah, that'd be fun.
All makes sense to me.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So what else is happening?
We've got another one. This is a guy from, a couple of other stories out there, but this one is a staff sergeant in North Dakota. And he is retired, and he says that in 1984 he had a sighting from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, and he's just submitting this now. He said the craft was hovering above a telephone pole. He watched it. He said it was about 75 to 100 feet across the highway. It was stationary, and he didn't know what it was. So this is kind of interesting. He said he had serviced aircraft, but he did not know what the heck this thing was. It was 25 feet long with a narrow body with wings swept forward, he said. He watched it for 15 minutes until it left flying west at a high angle and disappeared in 5 seconds. So this is kind of an interesting case that was submitted by Roger Marsh, a MUFON case. And, that's a kind of an exciting one.
You wonder why someone takes so long to report something.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, maybe it has to do with them like watching Hangar One or something on TV and say, hey, I didn't know I could report that. Maybe I will. I don't know.
I think that's exactly right. I think that people see these shows or they come across this, especially with MUFON, they finally come across a place where they can report it, and they didn't know there was such a place before. There's another story Roger posted the other day, and this is a former Marine from Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. He said he was out there in 68 and then 69, and he also had several UFO sightings. So that's another interesting story. The Daily Express just posted that today. They found it from us, but Daily Express often posts stories about our stories and don't give us credit. This guy, John Austin, who, funny enough, has also been writing some interesting stuff about Hillary Clinton and UFOs, stuff he's gotten from Steve Bassett. But unfortunately, Steve Bassett is having to post corrections every time this guy writes something because he's writing a lot of stories, and unfortunately, he focuses on getting them out quickly instead of accurately.
Wow, that's too bad. Guantanamo Bay, you just mentioned that. Does anybody talk about sightings in Cuba?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of a particular researcher that focuses on Cuba, but you do hear of them occasionally. But, hopefully maybe now that things open up, we'll find out they do have a UFO organization. I mean, communication hasn't been very open until recently. In fact, this is kind of interesting. I was talking to a Cuban citizen recently, and he talked about how it's been great because one of the things is as these things open up, they are asking for more rights for the citizens. So the U.S. won't open up any trade unless they, work on things like this. And one of the things that the U.S. asks is that their citizens get access to the Internet and cell phones. And now he's able to communicate with his family on a regular basis. And this is just recently. So It's only recent that a lot of this communication has opened up. So I think hopefully over the next few years, as things seem to get better with our relations with Cuba, we'll find out more of that sort of thing. But I'm sure there'll be some listeners who know some more about Cuban UFO stories. I can't think of a researcher or any particular stories right now, but great question.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a great destination place because, it's just such a beautiful tropical island and very interesting culture there, I'm sure.
Maybe I'll take a cruise there.
There you go. Hey, well, you have a great cruise next week, sir. And
I will.
Some good R&R.
I will, man. I'm going to be chilling out and looking at the stars and the ocean. And I'm sorry, people, but I'm not going to try to think much about anything but relaxing.
Until you see a UFO.
Yeah, that would be great. And it is amazing. I mean, when you're out there in the middle of the ocean and it's just completely dark, and then sometimes you'll come across a ship or something, this one point of light in the nothingness, and your mind wanders and you think, and if there were some lights under the water or something like that, like some people have reported, it would just be astonishing, and it would be you and that whatever it is there. I can't help, but of course my mind wanders in this area when I'm out there looking at that stuff. It would be amazing.
Right. All right. Well, you have a good one.
Yep. We'll talk to you in a couple.
All right, everyone. So hang in. After this quick music break, we'll be right back with Derrel Sims. Derrel Sims, welcome to the show.
How you doing?
Good. Great. Thanks for joining us. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, unfortunately. Can you turn down the volume of the speakers, please?
I will right now.
Yeah, this wasn't doing it when we did a sound check. But anyway, why don't you tell the listening audience, again, welcome to the show. Can you give the listening audience a little bit of your background and what got you interested? It's always an interesting topic when I find out how people first got interested in the UFO topic.
Well, it's as I've told people before, I was kind of a captive audience. I was 4 years old when I saw an entity leaving my room. I sat up in bed. It was late at night. I sat up in bed and I couldn't figure out who was in my room. And this was in Midland, Texas in 1952. And I saw this skinny little guy walking toward the wall, and I thought to myself, who is that? What is that? I didn't know. And the amazing thing is that he apparently heard me thinking that because he turned around immediately. And then I found something rather stunning. I heard him say something without using his mouth. And he said, "It's awake."
It's awake. Wow, interesting. Now, had you ever had a UFO sighting as well?
I've seen over 50 UFOs my entire life.
Oh, my goodness.
I've done a lot of. I used to live in New Mexico in Alamogordo and by Holloman Air Force Base. Good night. I've been a lot of places in about 30 countries around the world. We've got about 1,650 cases worldwide that we work on. And in fact, I just got back from India. We did an implant surgery in India about 3 months ago.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. That's pretty interesting. Now, you said you had over 50 sightings, which I think is amazing. And I do know some other people, at least one that's probably had that many. And one of the things I have to say about that is you're looking for one, whereas a lot of people that never have a sighting at all are not looking. I'm constantly looking. And I've talked about my one sighting that I had, but I'm reluctant to talk about a second sighting only because I'm worried about my credibility. And so I don't know what I saw. When I saw lights in the sky, that was the second one I saw, that actually like zigged and zagged. And first it was moving in a steady way, and then it zigged and zagged. And then I said, no, I'm not going to call it a UFO. I don't know what it was. I consider lights in the sky, and I'm just going to try to leave it at that.
That's really the safest way to think of it. In some of my cases, the events were witnessed by other people, and in several of those incidents, were literally bright sunlight where 3 red-orange discs came across the sky, heading toward Holloman Air Force Base and went over it. One time my wife, who was, when she was a kid in Alamogordo, New Mexico, for about 16 years old, saw a UFO, metallic, hanging out in the sky out about 2 miles outside of town. A lot of people saw it, watched it for 2 or 3 hours, and she finally got bored and went back inside.
Yes, I talked to someone in Russia that saw what sounded like, I've heard people call them a probe or a drone, that this thing, they said it looked just like the size of a washing machine, and it was spinning, and it just sat above the sky, and it was 4 hours. They came out, looked at it, got all the neighbors out to look at it with the binoculars, the whole thing, but eventually they all just got bored and went inside. So it's kind of funny. I mean, I don't know if I would. I think I would just watch it until something else happened. Get some popcorn if I had to.
If I had seen the UFO, I guarantee you I'd have been watching it a little longer during that circumstance. But she was just finally got bored. She said it just sat there forever, and they couldn't figure out what it was all about, so they just went inside, and that was it.
Yeah, on the message.
She's not an abductee or anything like that.
On the message board, someone wrote, 16-year-olds have a short attention span, which is very true. Today they'd be glued to their iPhone. And speaking of message board, if you are listening live, you are welcome to jump in. Our message board just takes 2 clicks to get in there. You can change your profile name, have an image, whatever you want to do. So, Derrel, so this began young with you. Did you have other encounters all your life growing up?
I did. I had encounters only from the age of about 4.5 till age 17, where my events ended very violently. And after that, that was it. I never had another event.
Wow. Can you talk about that? Ended violently?
The last one was pretty scary. And I've never told anybody about it in any detail for a number of reasons. I've been looking for people that had the same experience. And the entities that showed up in my last event, there were 5 of them, they don't show up in UFO literature at all. So anyway, I always get people call or they'll tell me, oh, yeah, me too, just exactly like it. And that's great. Describe them.
Yeah.
And what did they do? What are they about? And the whole story. And I've only had 8 people be able to answer that. And the 8 people that I've talked to that did answer that normally brought it up to me before I ever even mentioned it. And in that case, every one of these people, without exception, were traumatized in the worst sense of the word. One of them ended up with grand mal epilepsy after her event. Others, one lady, absolutely beautiful woman, thought she was the ugliest thing in the world. And I said, you're really stunningly pretty. And she said, no, I'm not. And when I took her back to her event and using revivification hypnotherapy, her face contorted to the most ugly thing you've ever seen in your life. Wow. And that's the way he left her. Anyway, just really, there are things out there that are, I guess, more than in our events. I guess if there was an SS of the alien, it would be something like that.
It sounds to me like the detective side of you, which we can talk a little bit about later, likes to leave known evidence quiet to hear, stay away from the copycat type situation where you're just waiting to actually hear something to confirm what you had happen. Is that what I'm getting?
You are getting it perfectly. That's exactly correct.
Yeah. And wow, that's really amazing. And so since 17 on, you're saying you had 50 sightings or so, or more, pardon me. And can you get into describing why do you think you're seeing so many?
Well, some of the sightings I could attribute to a possibly unique craft out at White Sands Missile Range area and Holloman Air Force Base.
Oh, yeah.
I saw a large triangular type object in the early 80s going across the sky, blocking out stars. And it was probably the size of a triangular postage stamp, if there was one, at an arm's distance. So it was pretty large, and it had an orange trail of spent fuel, I guess, behind it. And that was the only thing that lit it up from behind. And I could tell the shape of it because of the stars it was blocking out. But the most interesting thing to me, what just floored me, was it never made a sound.
Yes. I have to tell you, that's for my own personal sighting, the one I often talk about, that got me really interested in the subject. That was absolutely the number one thing that shocked me, is I just couldn't believe this thing was moving without making any sound, and how it could be stationary and then move again and nothing. And that really is, it doesn't fit our paradigm, and it just doesn't fit our normal reality. So it's really hard to take.
Well, you're so right. One time we were at our home outside Alamogordo, and my mother called me, and she said, come look at this. There's a strange light out here. And up near the mountain, which is in front of our home, out in the edge of the desert to the mountains, there was a cigar-shaped craft, similar to the, and I hate to use this term, the old cigar type craft that some of these wackos used to report all the time and fake photographs of. And there it was, and cars were stopped out on the highway. We could see them at the highway, completely stopped, lined up, watching this thing. It was just sitting up there, and it would move around a little bit, stop, and go back and forth. And it was definitely not a helicopter, never made a sound. And had there probably were 30, 40 witnesses that night to that entire event.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, you know, it's funny you mentioned earlier this triangular craft. You didn't hear too much of that. I know Dave Marler did a really good book about that and talks about how many of the triangle sightings there were, but I had never heard of anyone talking about triangles back in the 1980s, but I'm sure they happened, yours happened, and then I know they do go all the way back to the 1800s, but the cigar shape is one you hear of, and I remember hearing a ufologist from somewhere in Massachusetts told me that he thought that cigar-shaped ones were just simply discs on their side, but I disagree with that after talking to a number of people. One mentioned that he even saw portholes, pardon me, on one. You know, I mean, pretty interesting.
You are absolutely correct. And these objects, whenever they start flying around and moving, you can see that they're not disc at all. Now, there may be some case that one of them looked like a disc or something, but this particular one we were looking at was definitely a cigar-shaped craft, apparently quite large, and it was fairly well lit, and it just stunned everyone. We were not prepared for that at all.
Right. And what happens when you have 40 witnesses? Did you talk among each other, or did everyone just get back in their cars and drive away?
We were about a half a mile from the highway, and we could see the cars all lined up out there while we were watching this thing. As we were watching it for 15, 20 minutes, the cars just were driving from El Paso going into Alamogordo, and some of them would look up and they'd pull over, and then after a while someone else would pull over, and everybody's pointing up there, and then all of them started looking up there, and there they are. But we never did go talk to them or anything. I was just a kid. I mean, just probably 16 and a half, maybe 17 years old, maybe.
How about that? Now, there's when I was reading through the different things that you have done, you call yourself the alien hunter. Can you explain why you call yourself that?
I certainly can. Actually, the name came from a journalist who was interviewing me in Atlanta, Georgia, and during the course of the interview, she says, "Oh my God, you hunt them. Why, you're the alien hunter." I said, okay.
And it stuck.
I didn't make that up. That's where it came from.
And so what were you actually telling her that well, let's hear the story of...
Basically, I hunt them that hunted me and later came and hunted my son. If you can do anything you want to me, and I'm a big guy, I can take it, I can live with it, I'll deal with it. But when you come after my children, I will come after you. So now the bottom line is, as my 8 words is right now, you came for me, I'm coming for you. And I intend to capture one of them eventually. We come close to it 3 times already. The good news is we have some DNA samples from some of these entities, and we're excited about the physical evidence that we're getting.
All right, well, let's talk about that. But before we talk about the DNA or whatever, let's hear when you said you have almost caught them 3 times. Can you go into detail about that, please?
Sure. I guess the one that probably would be more interesting to you, a gentleman wrote he actually asked a question one time on a website, and he says, I was just wondering if there's an alien buster, and I didn't like the way he said it, so I thought, well, I'll just respond to that. And I sent him a story, which I'm glad to send any of your listeners tonight. It's free. And it's a case in which I took. It happened in the Snowmass Wilderness near Gunnison, Colorado, in 1995. I took 7 investigators with me, and I trained them in a particular set of techniques. I was using one of my investigators who gets abducted there every year on vacation. We were using him as bait, and that's the truth of it.
Wow.
And since he's going to, and he took someone with him the year before, and they witnessed him being abducted. In fact, the witness was a tight end at Texas Tech, and who he did not know was also an abductee himself. So I thought that was rather curious. But the bottom line is that we went to this area, and I had a trained observer set up every night outside the man's tent. We had our tents strategically placed in different locations next to a cliff behind us so that they would have to come down into the area or right. Well, I left a path where they could come in the dark, in which they did on the last night. And as every morning I would question everybody and say, does anybody notice anything? Go to each person, and they all said the same thing. No, not at all, nothing at all, nothing. And the last night and I don't do well in really high distances like that. So I got very little sleep in 7 days. I mean, I slept in just little 20, 30-minute patches. But anyway, I asked that last morning, and because I knew what had happened with me, so I didn't say a thing to anybody. I asked Ronnie and Patrice, and anything you hear, notice anything? And they both said the following. They looked at each other really strange and says, we heard something outside our tent, and something walking. And she looks at him and says, do you hear that? He looks at her and says, it's just a deer. Go back to sleep. And they both fell over in deep sleep. Then the entity came outside my tent. It's difficult to explain this to everybody because you have to know the lay of the land. There was a bright light in the middle of the campground area, especially right next to my right next to Dale's tent, where the trained observer was sitting, who happened to be a commercial airline pilot with a major airline. He's a captain on an airline. And he sat there every night, until it was daylight, every night, and never saw a thing, and so on and so on. But that night, they came from behind, which I thought that they would, and they came behind our tents, and one of them came outside my tent, and I could see him because of the light in the middle area. It was shining apparently on the back of him and against my tent, so I could see him clearly.
Like a silhouette or something?
He had a large head that was, I've never seen one like this before. His head was approximately a third the size of him, and he was only about 3.5 feet tall, maybe. I've never seen one like that, ever. And what I did remember, though, about my events was the way they communicated mentally, and I thought, this is a great opportunity for me to figure out something, see if anything works or not, since I'm conscious and not abducted. And so I got my face over close to the edge of the tent to see if I could communicate with this thing, see if it was possible. And sure enough, I was, and I was absolutely stunned at the, and this may offend some of our listeners, at the lack of his intelligence. These little guys have an IQ of about 80 to 85. That's about the IQ of a moron. And as a result, whenever they bring you back from some of these events, people find out that they get their clothes on backwards. They get your wrong shoes on the wrong feet. They may put you in the wrong bed, or if you're on the couch, you may end up in the bed. In some cases, people end up outside their house, even though they had a double tumbler lock. What that means is you have to have keys to get in and keys to get out. And the keys were inside the house. In one case, we had my senior investigator got abducted with his friend, again on one of these trips, and they picked him up, truck and all, in Fort Collins on the road, and they dropped him off in Dalhart, Texas, truck and all, with the wrong guy driving the truck.
Jeez. Wow. Now, you just mentioned the IQ, and of course, the first thought that comes to mind, well, if that's so, then how did they travel the stars, and how did they get here, and how do they communicate non-verbally, and blah, blah, blah. But I can also hear a possible reply that this is a sort of a drone that's, or something like that, that's working. What is your take on why something like that could be here and have not a high intelligence?
Well, let me back up to my last event, my first event at age 4.5, whatever my age was then, little tiny guy, and say this. Whenever the entity heard me and turned around, as all little kids would do, if you walk into the room nude, they're going to look at whatever's nude. And I noticed that he didn't have a TT, he didn't have a belly button, and he didn't have mammary glands of any kind. And I was sitting there stunned in my little bed, wondering, where's the rest of this guy? I mean, what is this? How come he was not like us? I couldn't understand that. And after investigating for nearly 40 years now, I realized if you don't have genitalia, you don't procreate. If you don't have a navel or belly button, so to speak, you weren't born. So you were either hatched, cloned, manufactured, or made. And in my opinion, the 7 primary entities we're looking at, the so-called little gray, the taller gray that's often called the doctor or the boss, the reptile, the praying mantis, and the so-called Bigfoot, these particular entities, in my opinion, and this is based on a lot of research and not something I dreamed up or wanted to come up with. This is just the answer at this point. This is what my thinking is at this point. These are models made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured for the purpose of interaction with mankind.
Now, was this a question? We have a number of questions up on the message board. Was this entity in particular wearing any type of suit or anything? Did you actually see him out from the tent?
The entity that I saw outside the tent did not appear to have any clothing on, because I'm looking at him through he's a shadow on the side of my tent. He's standing right next to the tent, to the edge of the tent. And he did not appear to have any clothing on whatsoever. Many of them do not. The ones that do have clothing on, in most cases, this appears to be some type of rank or position among them.
How about that? Now, again, I mentioned earlier that we have a message board and people are in there now asking questions. And Matthew wants to know, how did the discovery of alien fluorescence come to be?
Oh, great question. Well, you got some great people in there.
Oh, yeah.
Fluorescence was found by me in 1992. In 1992, I was working with this lady that I mentioned to you that thought she was really ugly, but
yes,
was actually quite beautiful. Mm-hmm. And while I was interviewing her, I said, "May I examine your exposed face, arms, and so on?" She said, "Of course." And I pulled out a black light and started checking her exposed arms and face and neck. And on the inside of her arm, as I lifted it up, there was a Mandelbrot set. A Mandelbrot set, for those that may not know about that, it's a mathematical construct that kind of looks like a heart. And it was bright blue, and its meaning has a description mathematically of order and chaos. And that was on the inside of her arm. And when she saw that, and when I saw it, me and the other investigator were just sitting there scratching our heads like, can you believe this? And as we looked at it, she went to the bathroom and started scrubbing it. She reminded me of a rape victim, how they will wash themselves and trying to get whatever off of them. And the more she scrubbed, of course, the brighter it got because it won't come off. The fluorescence will penetrate your skin on contact if it's the real stuff. The real stuff being something like a sweat-like material that the alien exudes when he touches you. In other words, if he physically takes you in an event, grabs your hand or you grab his hand or arm or whatever, it's likely that you're going to find fluorescence on you in the shape of 3 long fingers or something like that. And that's what we call casual contact. We find other marks in fluorescence on people in rare cases that are procedural markings, and those have to do with they actually put something on you on purpose.
Wow. And you mentioned in your bio, I saw that you were one of the, it says that you had some groundbreaking discoveries in as far as implants go?
That is true. We've got some pretty startling things that we're finding about the implants, and we're doing some pretty private stuff right now because we've got some testing that we're wanting to do, and several people that we're doing it with. One of the things that we, of course, how I found implants originally was in 1960. And how I discovered that wasn't because of any brilliance or anything like that. It had to do with the fact that I was 12 years old and strangely heard my mother's voice saying to go outside and look at the new star in the Pentine. Now, the Pentine is a nonsensical thing, but it was amazing that I knew what it was. It was a star system in my thinking, and it was just amazing. My mother and dad were on the other end of the house, and there's no way I could hear her perfectly, just like we're talking right here. And I sat up instantly in bed, completely wide awake, walked outside, saw a very bright light on the horizon, and obviously, and of course, there was Mars and Venus and everything else out there, and you'd see the stars and these planets very well, and this very bright light on the horizon, and I kept looking at it, thinking, why is it getting bigger? It never occurred to me it's coming toward me. And at 12 years old, you just kind of look at the light, and it was kind of like the movie Phenomenon. The guy kept looking at it, and boom, all of a sudden, next thing I know, I'm inside a circular room lying under on a I call it the slab. It's a cold table that was elevated about 11 degrees, and I saw my captor over there who always picks me up. You can recognize, if there's a million of them, even though they look the same, you will easily identify yours. Now, I have no idea because they all look the same to me. I mean, every one of them. But I knew he was there. I saw him, and I could also see somebody bigger than him that seemed to be in charge. He was quite nasty little guy. And he was in charge of the whole operation, and he had a long, about an 8-inch needle-like device with a little silver sphere on the end of it. And he started coming toward me and inserted in my nasal passage and rammed it up my nasal passage and broke the bones. And there was no anesthesia. And there was no, you won't feel pain or whatever. It was horrific. And when he finally pulled the needle back out, there was no sphere on the end of it. So that was my first experience with the implant phenomena.
Wow, that's quite a story. Someone wants to know if you know how to stop an abduction.
Well, I can give you some good hints, and I'm glad to do that because, as far as I'm concerned, it's invasive, and if you don't want it, I'm happy to help anyone do that. And we have thwarted several abductions in our events. We also did some training for certain abductees who wanted to be our test pilots, so to speak, in their abductions. Mm-hmm. And I will do it. And so we found that the aliens are not all powerful. They're not all everything some people label them to be. They're not all wise. They're not all anything. In fact, when they're in 3D and they're near you, they're just as vulnerable as you are. And that's the reason they prefer you paralyzed and frightened or in awe so that you won't do anything or can't respond or defend yourself in any way. But one of the ways that you can do to help yourself, just as an average individual, is to this is I'll give you the kid version of it first.
Okay.
Sometimes we have children that parents come to me and they're just beside themselves and sometimes in tears. saying my kid keeps telling me about these abductions and how they keep taking them, and I don't know what to do. And I said, actually, it's often true that when people grow up after their events or as they get older, they get where they dislike or can't stand one of their parents because they think they never protected them. And this is what one of these parents said. They said, "Well, we're worried about our kid, and we don't know what to do. I mean, just a small kid. What can I do?" And I said, "This is going to be very simplistic and almost amusing, really." I said, "But you'll find that it's very effective against the small gray." And she says, "Please tell me what it is." And I said, "Have your kid." I said, if they've never seen the Mickey Mouse show, the old version, have them watch it just to learn the song. It doesn't matter what song you use, but that one's kind of fun because it's nonsensical. It goes on forever and ever and ever. And she says, "Okay, how do you do it?" And I said, "You just have them sing or any song. It doesn't matter. MICKEY MOUSE," and you sing it, and every time they try to focus on you and get you to on fear or awe or whatever their program is they're going to try to run on you, don't ever let up. Just keep doing it, keep singing it until next thing you know, you're in your room and you're still singing. Your parents may come in and wonder, "What are you singing in your room for?" Because you never made it out, or they finally just give up on you because you drive them nuts. They're not that smart anyway. You can imagine listening to somebody singing that over and over and over. You can't get through to them. You can't control them at that point. So that's a useful technique I love to use for small children. And when I was filming with my other three co-stars in Uncovering Aliens, the TV show that we started for a series, in that one, a young girl about 16 had a little baseball bat she kept beside her bed. And I said, "Young lady, you're going to need a bigger bat." And what I really meant was you need something better than that because it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to use something like that unless you know what you're doing. But using nonsensical terms and focusing yourself in such a way that they cannot access your brain. That is a huge thing to know about the alien.
How about that? Someone wrote up on the message board they should sing "It's a Small World After All." I love I was thinking that myself. Crazy.
That's wonderful. It doesn't matter.
Someone wants to know if that show is ever coming back on.
It's supposed to be on. Look on my Facebook page, Alien Hunter, Derrel Sims, the Alien Hunter on Facebook. And I believe somebody's posted, Mike Barra, I think he's one of their co-stars, posted that they're replaying it again, I think this weekend or something. But it just got posted up here. So look for Uncovering Aliens on the Facebook. Search for it, or Mike Barra, my co-star, and he's the one that brought it up. And it's about the Sedona. One of the shows for sure is going to be about the Sedona show that we shot last there.
Uh-huh. Now, in your bio, it says you were former military police, a police officer, and also a CIA operative. And can you talk a little bit about that background? And when you were actually working with the CIA, did any of this subject ever come up, like water cooler talk or anything like that?
Okay. First part of the question is I was going to New Mexico State University as a college student. I was a year and a half into college, and I wanted education to be different for me than what I was getting there. That was pretty dry, cut and dried. It was, to me, like a mass delivery system for dead information, as far as I was concerned. I understood the educational value of some of that and getting a degree and all that, but I wanted something more. Education to me meant more than just memorizing data and so on. So I quit college and joined the Vietnam War effort and volunteered for the Army and went in. And while I was at Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is the military police school, what I'd signed up for, I and about 70 other people were called out to go to this meeting, and long and the short of it was the people that were interviewing us were CIA. Of course, we had no idea who they were, and I thought they were CID. That's Criminal Investigation Division, which are the detectives of the military police, because they're the only people in the military that we had that wandered around in suits. And these guys were in suits. And I thought, well, I told them, I said, you guys are CID. And they said, no. But I almost got it right. It was CIA. And they didn't tell us who they were or anything. And they kept interviewing us. And finally, they whittled us down to about 25, 30 people. And the head guy interviewed me and said, you're exactly what we want. And I said, you don't know anything about me. He said, I know everything about you. Everything. And the long and the short of that was that they'd already done backgrounds on the people they really wanted. And when we finished our schooling there, everybody, of course, got their orders to go somewhere. And everybody in my entire battalion, with the exception of us, were chosen for this program and volunteered for it, because you actually volunteered, and we didn't know what it was, but it sounded pretty interesting. So we ended up going to Washington, D.C., and then after our top secret clearances finally came through, we were hauled off to a secret CIA base, and that's where we began our work. My job primarily there was top secret security on a CIA installation, and basically a place where they train spies. And my second thing that I did there that I really enjoyed was a martial arts instructor, and I was also a weapons instructor as well in my short tenure there. So I stayed there for 2 years. And for those of you out there in radio land that think I'm some kind of CIA agent or something like that, that's not even close. I had a disagreement with one of the personnel in the CIA, and they ordered me to violate my First Amendment right, and I refused, and I ended up exiled out of the continental United States to ASCOM Korea and placed back into the military. So I said my rights are far more important than my duty here or anything else, and I will not surrender that. So for those that think I'm on the CIA roll and getting a big check every month, I'd love to have the check, but just ain't happening. And as the man referred to me as I left, he said, "You're no longer family." And believe me, that's a serious statement whenever the company makes that kind of statement about you.
Were you ever told what they thought was special about you, why the CIA wanted you?
Well, that's what I asked the guy. I said, I'm a martial arts guy. I said, I had a martial arts school at New Mexico State University. Started the first martial arts school there in 1966, and taught the Air Commandos and Black Beret in the ROTC program for Army and Air Force. And he said, I know all about that. And why me? I don't get it. I said, I would be more interested in the martial arts than probably what you want me to do. And he says, I have 2 gymnasiums for you. You can have a color TV in your room if you like. You'll never go to Vietnam. And I said, I don't think you understand me, sir. I signed up to go to Vietnam. That was the point. And that really puzzled him. And he begged me to explain that. And I said, I'm Native American, Indian, Irish. I said, both sides of my family have been busting heads and taking names since at least 1,000 years ago. And I said, I don't like the war. I don't like anything about it. I said, but I would prefer me to go to Vietnam. I said, if I go there, I said, I'm not going to go there to die for my country. I promise you. I'm going there to make you die for your country. I said, and I would prefer me to come back. And I think I would. I said, a lot of these boys that are going to come back are not going to be the same. It's going to ruin a lot of them mentally. They have no business being there. They're not real soldiers. They're just draftees, and they have no business being there, in my opinion. It ought to be a volunteer army, not a... Anyway, it was just a difference in opinion with me, but that he was just stunned. And I said, as you have a son? He said, yes, I do. I said, would you like for him to go to Vietnam? He said, no. I said, then I'm taking someone's son's place, aren't I?
Wow.
He just could not grasp that. Now,
someone wanted to know what base you served at in Vietnam.
I didn't go to Vietnam. I went to ASCOM, Korea.
Oh, sorry.
ASCOM, yeah. And I served from there almost to the DMZ and at Yongsan, but mostly at Ascom, Korea for 9 months.
I see. Okay. There was another question I was trying to get to, but they're scrolling in pretty fast. All right. So the question I was thinking about asking you in this, when you were actually working with the CIA, did you ever talk to anyone about your experiences?
I had some people talk to me about theirs. And interestingly enough, the people, I had civilians as well that were taking martial arts classes from me as well. And a young girl came to me, and her father was the director of admissions of a very famous university. And he was a martial arts student of mine as well, and his 2 daughters. And she came to me privately and said, I need to talk to you. And she says, I don't know who else to talk to. And I said, well, talk to me. And what she told me floored me. This is 1968. She said, Mr. Sims, and sensei is what she called me. It means honorable teacher in Japanese. Mm-hmm. She says, sensei, and she broke down and started crying. She says, this strange purple light came into my room, shimmering and everything. Of course, she didn't realize that is an entity in transit. And at the time, I didn't know that either. I tried to console her with some stupid statements like, oh, it was just a bad dream, or it'll go away. When you're talking to an abductee, that's one of the worst things you could ever say to them. It's not a bad dream. It's a nightmare, but not a bad dream. It's a real event. And I said, it's over now, and that's okay. And she looked at me and just cried even more, and she said it came back. And I said, I'm going to tell you something, young lady. I said, if it ever comes back again, you call me 24/7, anytime, I don't care. I gave her my private number on the base. I said, you call me, and I will come out there immediately, and I'll bring out one of my people, and I'll come there to your home, and I said, I know your dad very well. He'll welcome us in an instant. So that was my first introduction to an abductee in the CIA. The idea that some people have an idea that everybody in the government knows UFOs. They don't know anything. Trust me on this. The government is dumb. Those folks can't even, they can't get your Social Security numbers. They can't do a lot of things correct. And I'm not picking on anybody. I'm telling you the gospel truth. The fact is that a cabal inside the Office of Naval Investigations and the Air Force and Central Intelligence Agency, NSA, and so on, these are the ones who know. But if you walk up to the front door, and there's no front door there for you to walk up to. If you walk up to the front gate at Langley and tell them, I'm here to ask questions about UFOs, they'll just turn you right back around and think you're nuts. You know why? Because they think you are. They don't have a clue what you're talking about, not even a clue. So the idea that the government knows all of it and we don't know anything, that's just not true. Only a portion of the government knows that, and they're never going to tell you. They're not elected people, and they don't have to tell anybody anything, and they hide it even from presidents as much as they can.
Well, that's it for the free part of the show. If you'd like to listen to 2 full hours of every show and listen to any of the archives, all you have to do is help us out for $2 or more a month. Just think, for only the cost of a small coffee, you could help us out a lot. We are in the red, actually. The bandwidth on the free shows keeps us kind of in the red here. We could really use your support. And if you can't help us out, we still thank you for listening for the first part of the show, regardless. I want to thank a few people. Alejandro Rojas for the news, our guest, of course. And next week, we have, I like to do shows with people that you may have never heard of. This gentleman has never spoken before. His name is Dr. Richard O'Connor, and he was very close friends, best friends, with Jesse Marcel Jr., and he has opened a library in his name. Interesting man. I met him when I was out in Phoenix. So that's for next week. So thanks, everyone, and we'll be back next week. Keep your eyes to the sky.